Good morning to everyone and welcome. I'm excited about this session we're going to have on kind of building a foundation for world-class analytics. This expert briefing series this morning is with David Marco. David is a BAC expert. If you want to look at all the things he's done and the books he's written and quite a bit about him, go to BAC, as Ryan was mentioning, and look in the expert area. And search for David's page, and you'll see all kinds of materials he's written there, and a blog he has, and a bunch of materials about him. But David's an expert in lots of different areas, especially in the area of analytics. He's also done a ton of work around metadata, so he really understands kind of the infrastructure required for building analytics. And as I said earlier, I think this is a very timely topic, and I'm glad to have David with us today. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Rich. How are you doing? And thank you so much for those kind words.
You are welcome. Well-deserved words, actually. So before we get into kind of all the nitty-gritty of what you think's kind of required to build a foundation for world-class analytics, analytics gets a lot of play today. Everybody's talking about analytics. Why don't you give us a little background from your perspective on kind of what's happening in the market, maybe some of the practices that are changing or are in the midst of changing and have changed over the last few years.
Absolutely. You know, as you know, Rich, because you go back a ways, as I do myself, we've been in analytics for decades. And really over the last 5 to 7 years, there's been a tremendous shift in the market. One of the things is the advent of these new data sources, things like social media. It's very critical if you're a company serving your customer base, what are they saying about you on social media? What are they saying on Facebook? What are they tweeting? What are they putting on Instagram? That is a huge, huge topic that impacts our sales. Wouldn't you want to know if we're doing a new marketing campaign that this particular campaign people were tweeting about, that they were posting about? Then you have the whole Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is such a fancy word for sensor data, which come in a wild variety. They have more flavors of sensor data than there is of ice cream. So depending on your business, if you're in manufacturing or if you're in some consumer interfacing company, this kind of data is a massive new source. So when you combine all this historical data that we've been collecting for decades, it's not uncommon for companies, in fact, most Global 2000 companies have petabytes of data. Now, do they analyze them well? Well, that's a different topic, but that is really how things have changed, along with technology. This whole advent of Hadoop and big data, and the fact that, years ago, in fact, I could do a prop on this. Years ago, when I started in the industry, we used to have a room of servers to hold a terabyte of data. Now, for $80, this holds a terabyte of data. And it's the size of a small piece of toast. That's a change.
Yeah, but that it creates a whole series of other issues, which is, as we know, analyzing large volumes of data gets to be trickier. When we just had a few hundred gigabytes, you could throw it into Excel and you could cut and paste. I mean, you could slice and dice and move it around and, did whatever. When you're talking about terabytes or petabytes of data, that's a different issue. And you touched on something a minute ago I want to come back to, which is, what are the challenges really facing some of these companies? Because I think that's a great topic as well as we kind of set up and talk about those foundational issues that are critical to world-class analytics.
Well, I think there's a host of challenges. Number one of the problems that we have, and I'm trying to think the order I want to go with all these challenges, but I would say one of the things that really impacts our companies today is we have lots and lots of data. We mentioned, many companies are over a petabyte of data. The problem is most of that data is redundant. In my experience of working with Global 2000 companies and these large federal agencies, for every 4 petabytes of data they have, Three of those four are needlessly redundant, meaning they exist only because we don't do architecture well. So I'm not counting backups. We need backups, right, Rich? Some idiot kicks out the plug, we need a backup. A data warehouse or some type of analytical structure, I'm not counting those. I just mean needless backup that exists because we haven't managed our environment. Data quality would be a second thing. You look at the quality of data that we are presenting to our knowledge workers, and it's abysmal. It's absolutely abysmal. I can give you an example. We had this huge organization that we were working with, and their senior management thought that they didn't have an issue with the quality of their data. And they work it within one state within the United States, and they're a hospital, an insurance arm, so they're big. If you were to look at the number of counties in their state, I think it was 72 distinct counties. Well, Rich, we can't argue about the number of counties in a state. That's defined by the government. That we should get that right. When you looked at their data, when you profiled it, they had over 260 distinct values for county. So could you imagine customer number or address?
Yeah. And what gets interesting about that particular subject is we love to take this data and display it and build graphs and charts, but if the underlying data is not very good, then the results are not very good, right?
Rich, you're so accurate on that. It doesn't matter how beautiful the chart looks. It doesn't matter that it's on your mobile device. It doesn't matter if we're beaming it into your brain. If the data's wrong, the decisions we make will be also incorrect. And that's our other problem. You touched on it when you mentioned, hey, when we had gigabytes of data, we put them on a spreadsheet, you can make a pivot table, and you can work with it. But when you talk terabytes or petabytes, the human mind can't handle that. And what most companies do, and it's incorrect, is they just throw data at their business users and just say, hey, Rich, you're smart, you're our marketing manager, let me just throw all this at you. And you're looking at it saying, what am I going to do? That's why the companies that do analytics well, I mean world-class analytics, they don't just send out data. They give actionable information. So Rich, if you're the COO and I report to you and I look at this report, I need to look at that data and have actionable information. Oh my gosh, I need to talk to Rich right now because of this number. Or I don't need to talk to Rich because of this number. Or I need to avoid Rich because he may fire me because of this number. So I want to be able to look at that report and know exactly what I'm going to do. If I have to spend hours, days, or weeks sifting through data, we're not really providing value.
You know, it'd be an interesting study, and I'm not sure how we would perform it, to see how much money is wasted based on bad decisions that were based on really poor information. Because I have to believe it's astronomical. And what's ironic is sometimes it's hard to get funded. I hate to say that, but sometimes it's hard to fund projects around data quality because I think some folks don't appreciate what in fact is actually happening in terms of their poor decision making.
You're exactly correct. I think of when you were talking about that, the impact of the decisions. And I could share one story. It was a huge automobile manufacturer. We would all know their name. And they had a recall on one of their parts. And it was an expensive recall. I mean, it's like a $500 part, maybe more. So they sent out refund checks to all the people who owned that car, Well, the CFO of this company got a check. There was only one problem. He doesn't own the car.
Wow.
So do you know what happened? Could you imagine what happens when that gentleman comes into the office the next day?
That's amazing. Hey, so as we talk about this leads in great. So what are those kind of foundational elements that are so critical for building a world-class analytics environment?
Absolutely. It's such a good, powerful question. And to me, it goes back to the fundamentals of data management. And I'm going to give three major ones that And almost any time we work with an organization, we do a lot of assessments, we do a lot of strategies and roadmaps before we start implementing. And these are the three areas that I think companies are the most efficient in, that they need to be great in. Number one, we need great metadata management. This whole concept of what data do we have, where does it exist, what does it mean, how is it being used, what's redundant, what is it, what are the valid values, what are the invalid values, what applications do we have and who owns them? That kind of capability, along with a plethora of other things, is vital, and it's missing at too many organizations. Number two, data governance. Think of metadata management as the technical framework, the technical capabilities that enable all of your data management efforts. Data governance are the people processes. How are we going to make a decision if Ryan, Rich, and David are in a room and we have to make decisions for our organization? What's the protocol? Who's in charge ultimately of that decision? Who leads our discussion? What are the rules of engagement? How do we disseminate what we decide out to the rest of the organization? How do we get feedback? All those frameworks and controls for governance are critical. And then I'll give you the third one, and I know this is an area close to your heart, is enterprise data modeling. One of the most troubling areas in our industry is the lack of good modeling. 10 years ago, when an organization would come to us to work, half the time they wanted to know, okay, how do we enterprise model? How do we build this discipline? Now it's very rare that we get a partner come to us and say, we want to improve our data modeling. And as a result, the models we see out in the industry are getting worse and worse and worse. And Rich, remember earlier we talked about how the data volume is growing. Unstructured sources, new structures, new approaches. When you combine that, astronomical growth of data, astronomical demands, and terrible modeling, that's a recipe for disaster.
So just for curiosity, if I listen to that and I agree with your points, where does somebody start? Especially in this mood of companies wanting to see results fairly quickly, because this is a massive problem. So if they go down the massive problem path, this could be, they'll never deliver anything. So how do you advise your clients? Yeah.
It's a fantastic point to bring up. So you're right. If you look at a big Fortune 500 company, to fix these problems globally, that is going to take years. But we're not going to wait years to get results. So what I like to do with one of these organizations is, number one, we need to have an assessment and an honest look of where we're at. Now, assessments should not take 6 months, a year, 2 years, the way other people are doing that. These should be done in a much shorter period of time. Have an assessment, where are we? And then define, okay, where are we going to go to? As is, to be. Then what you do is you have this strategic vision. And yeah, we're going to get to that powerful world-class environment, and it's going to take us 2, 3, maybe 4 years to get there. However, we are going to implement this in small, manageable steps, 3 to 6 month releases, with each step getting us closer to the vision, but also being valuable and giving us a positive return on investment with each step. And this is, I just think it is the best approach. We've been doing this. We've been in business. Next year will be 20 years. And this is the approach we've taken, and it's proven to be fantastic, of manageable steps, looking for those pain points, the low-hanging fruit that provide the value soonest. So that's what I wrote.
So that, it sounds like you're kind of applying almost an agile approach to how you roll out and kind of evolve their strategy over time.
Absolutely. Well, agile is a charged up word, Rich. So the way companies use it, I've seen some companies where agile just means, where agile on one extreme is a bunch of people screaming at each other in a room to make a decision now, all the way to really they're doing iterative development. And for those of us who've been in the industry, we've done iterative for decades. And iterative was always that. It was never take 10 years to do something or 5 years or 3. It was manageable pieces that delivered value. And to me, that's the best approach. And iterative done properly has always had that agile component. Because I agree, too much time we get analysis paralysis. And we cannot have that. I can give you all kinds of stories on that, but I don't want to gobble up our hour.
So when you do an assessment, one of the things you mentioned as you started this, and we've seen it, I've had lots of conversations with people that experience the same thing, which is companies have this bad habit of thinking they know how many counties are in their state, right? Because how can it be wrong? It's well defined. And then they don't really look at their data as sometimes as they should during their assessment. So what are some of the things you do during your assessment phase to really get to be what we used to call as a fact-based decision?
Well, great question. So when I work on site, I like to joke that 25% of my time is technology, 25% is methodology, 50% is psychology. Because that is what it is. You know, there's an old joke. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, Rich, but the bulb's got to want to change. So a lot of times you learn how to break bad news in a nice way that gets people motivated. So some of the things, if you're going to do an assessment, that we tell people, hey, we are not worried about how we got here. So this is not about pointing fingers. It's not about who screwed up in the past. All that's relevant is we need to know where we're at today and where we need to get to and how we're going to get there. So taking away the judgment aspect of who made what decision, who owned what, and who did what, we need to get rid of that because we need to focus on the here and now. So that is a critical item because nobody wants their pet project shown to be the farce that it is. Nobody wants that. Finding great supporters, project champions. Now this is where, you know, a lot of times we talk companies, but let's not forget the federal government. And the federal government differs from the commercial sector. And here's one of the major ways it differs. In the commercial sector, we want the right person, that person of authority, to say yes. In the government sector, it's a little different. There's about 4,000 people who can say no. And so you have to manage the 4,000 people who say no, as opposed to looking for the one person who says yes. So to me, that's kind of the challenge, is getting people to realize, hey, we need to move forward. And we have all kinds of techniques, you know, looking at our competition. What's our competition doing? Let's look at case studies. Let's look at pain points within our company, things which happen that we are very embarrassed about, that happened because we didn't have the foundation correct in our organization. Our analytics weren't where they needed to be. Let's look at our corporate objectives. Those are the kind of things I like to target to get that company moving forward and to have that in a spirit of doing it together as opposed to, you know, win-lose, if you will.
So this is, I have to believe, a very refreshing message to many companies to say, look, you know, in 3, 4, or 5 months, we're going to show you some tangible results. And then we're going to get you on a roadmap that kind of takes you to where you really want to get. But it's going to take time, but you're going to see value all along that path. So it's great. So as we kind of talk about that, how are companies kind of adapting to all of these changes that are happening in the marketplace?
Well, that's a loaded question. How are they adapting to all this stuff? Well, some of them have taken the wait and see approach where they're very hesitant. They're very, they kind of want to let everybody else endure the slings and arrows, and then they'll come along and kind of see when it shakes out. You have other companies who've been very aggressive, sometimes too aggressive. They kind of take the ready, fire, aim approach. Anybody from the military out there, you know, that's a lousy way to shoot. Ready, fire, aim, terrible sequence. And that leads to problems. That's why you see, Rich, big data projects, over 50% of them do not even finish, let alone can fail based on the results. They don't even finish because they just kind of said, oh, let's start using Hadoop. They didn't frame the problem well. They didn't make an intelligent decision of the use of the technologies that are out there. They just want to start playing. And so that's fine if you're going to have a sandbox, but let's solve specific business problems. So I think with some companies, they struggle with this. One thing that is refreshing is when you go to a conference, you hear a lot of buzzwords, we're going to put this in the cloud, and we're going to have this be virtual, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And they throw out a lot of buzzwords. And I'm starting to see executives kind of see through some of that stuff where they realize, well, wait a minute, throwing Hadoop in a cloud doesn't solve the fact that we don't even know who our customer is, and that we have 20 instances of the same customer. None of that will solve this issue. And I'm starting to see a turn where they realize, hey, just because I've read it in a magazine or I saw it, in an article, that doesn't mean it works like that. That we need to be a little bit smarter and a little bit more strategic in how we approach it.
Yeah, and that seems to be very consistent with other things that I've read and have seen about the fact that there is kind of a resurgence, and I love the points you made around what's important: metadata management, governance, true data management, etc. And what's interesting in there is there's no discussion about visualization. It's important, but it's not the focus. There's no discussion about, in some senses, the biggest, baddest Hadoop infrastructure or relational database. I can, choose. I don't have to choose one or the other. Both of which, by the way, I think you would argue are absolutely part of what that foundation needs to look like. But in many ways, it's these other parts that I think aren't talked about. And especially, you mentioned it earlier, I mean, this whole area of kind of data governance and master data management, to me, it hasn't been talked about enough as it relates to building a good infrastructure around a really good world-class analytics environment.
Absolutely, and Rich, exactly correct. And too many times we think world-class analytics or world-class data management, it's a single technology. I buy this technology stack and everything will work out great. That's a mistake, because great data management and great analytics, which will come out of it, are a coordinated framework of disciplines. That's what they are. We need to be great at metadata management. We need to be great at data governance. We need to be great at modeling. We need to be great at reference and master data management, because that's going to make our big data efforts actually work and hum. That's going to make our analytics visualization engine that we're going to put on everybody's mobile device. So when our salesmen are right in front of the client, they can take out their iPad, take out their phone, press a couple buttons and display something right to the client to close that sale. All that needs the proper foundation to actually make it happen. And that's what's critical.
Yeah, and to your point, if you don't have, not to beat a dead horse, but if you don't have good data and you haven't figured out how to put good data quality governance aspects into your system, you're showing that display to your customer, and your customer going, this is wrong. This isn't how I see my business, and you just killed your deal. So data in that context becomes so important.
Absolutely, it's 100% vital. And you're right, because we're in front of the customer now. And especially with social media, people can now communicate. An individual consumer can communicate to hundreds, if not thousands of people about a problem. We all can go on the internet and look at the Better Business Bureau website and communicate issues, and everybody will see this. So it's a big, big deal.
Well, thank you. This has been an awesome conversation. And kind of, I think, as we're probably going to go back to Ryan in here to see if there's any questions for us from the audience, but is there kind of parting comment, kind of summarizing kind of, what you would send somebody away with to say, if you're here, go do this?
Absolutely. I would say a couple things. If you're looking to build a world-class analytics engine, focus on the foundations, focus on the fundamentals. That's number one. But number two, this will not be easy. Easy is a 4-letter word, and it will not be the end result of this mission. It won't be easy. However, be diligent, be smart. Use the best practices that have been proven over and over again to be successful. If you do that, you will not have a failure. You will have a monstrous success as long as you strictly adhere to those best practices and foundational concepts. This can and is consistently done correctly when you do that. It is not rocket science, but you got to be diligent.
You know, it kind of changes that old adage. You know, it used to be he who had the data wins. Today, I think it has to do with he who has the right data, the correct data, the best data, and can deliver it in a way that's effective is going to win.
Absolutely. If we're in competing, Rich, exactly correct. If we're in competing companies, the winner in the market won't be me because I have 100 petabytes of data and you only have 1, so that means we're 100 times better than you. It's your use of that data. It's your effective use and making it actionable information where you're bringing content and context to your knowledge workers, your decision makers, making a big impact. That's the difference. It's not about data volume.
That's an awesome conclusion. Hey, Ryan, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we have one. And before I kind of bring that one to the table here, I want to remind everybody that if you do have a question, that Q&A button up at the top of your Zoom window, that's the best way to submit it. And then also, I'll say this too, for any of you who happen to be watching on replay in the future, if this has brought up questions for you, I'd encourage you, David has an expert page here on BAC. Head on over there, and in his forum, you can post questions directly that, or you can see questions other people have posed that David's answered. That's a great way to kind of be part of this conversation, even if you're watching after the fact here. So with that, David, so this question, you talked about Fortune 500 companies earlier, and then we had the massive car company recall issue. This person's asking about, what about smaller companies? So would you say that you mentioned those foundational principles, metadata management, data governance, and I think the third one was enterprise data modeling. So the question, would you say these foundational things are universal regardless of company size? And I'll add here, so obviously the software stack might be different, the tool stack you use might differ based on your company's size. But what about those core principles? Does anything change if I'm tiny versus if I'm large?
No, absolutely. Everything's about scope. And even the core principle of having a vision of where you want to get to and doing it in manageable pieces, I would say everything Rich and I discussed would be equally applicable to a smaller organization. Now, some of the techniques will change. Your scope is different. It's not as difficult. You're not dealing with 1,000 applications. You're probably dealing with less than 100. So I would suggest that in a smaller organization, realize too that you're going to use some different technology, maybe some smaller technology. For example, there's metadata software out there that is just fantastic for management, and some of it is pricier. It would be very applicable for a global 2,000 company, but there's other software out there that does a very fine job. Maybe it's not industrial powered, but for a smaller company, it would be great. I did want to mention, Ryan, you mentioned about my forum where people can ask questions. You know, I just urge everyone, don't hesitate to it. It's like having my cell phone and sending me a text. I will definitely respond to your questions, and I'm happy to. So don't hesitate. And that's a great question from our audience.
Great. Thanks, David. And so that's all we've got here live as far as questions. Rich, I'll hand it back to you.
Hey, David, I have a follow-up question. I think the question that was asked by the audience is an interesting one. I want you to respond to something. Sorry for keeping you for a couple more minutes here, but I actually think that sometimes smaller companies look at all of these technologies and issues and say, it's not for me. I don't have that kind of problem. I don't have those kinds of data volumes. And in fact, it may be true, but maybe the impact that they can have on their organization is just as big, and potentially, here's a premise, they can actually get results faster because they're not dealing with sometimes all of the history and infrastructure and volumes of data. You know, the grass isn't always greener. And for the enterprise guys, they have many times their environments are so complex, it takes them months and months and months to get something that a small company or a mid-sized company might be able to do in a few weeks to a few months.
Rich, you're 1,000% correct. I like kind of use the analogy of, you know, I'm blessed enough to have an 8-year-old daughter, and if I tell her, if I don't tell her to clean her room, it's very odd. Her room doesn't get cleaner. In fact, it gets dirtier. And the mess gets bigger and bigger, so that when we eventually have to clean that room, it's a big job. It's going to take a whole Saturday just to clean that room. And it's the same thing with our companies. These global 2,000 companies who've not really managed their data well, they have a problem that will take years and lots of money to fix, and they have to fix it. If you're a smaller organization, you can fix the problem now with very little, much smaller effort. And your advantage as a smaller company is you can be much more agile. You can be faster to market. So put in the processes now. Put them in now so that your foundation is rock solid. It'll cost you a fraction of what it will cost when you start on the wrong foot. You build off that poor foundation. And now you're no longer small. You're a mid-sized company. Maybe you're a large company. And now you have a problem. And you have a big problem that will harm you because now everyone knows who you are. And you're going to have to spend years fixing what you should have done right in the first place. So for a smaller company, to me, that is the time to fix it. Do not hesitate because you can do it at a fraction of the cost of what it'll be when it's an ingrained problem.
Well, that's great advice. And actually the advice throughout this talk has been excellent. For those that are watching, or as Ryan said, looking at it in the future, there's lots of things David has on his portal within BAC, so go visit it, go check him out. By the way, he is absolutely one of the folks in Business Analytics Collaborative that responds quickly. So post something on his forum and he'll get back to you. And thank you again for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and this was an awesome presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. And Rich, I had a blast. Your questions were fantastic. And Ryan, I appreciate you just managing everything perfectly.
And for those that are live, we have a couple more coming up events this week. One with Gary Kokens on analytic-based performance management, which is kind of a related topic, but he's going to take us down kind of a different path. I'm very excited. Gary's a new expert on Business Analytics Collaborative. And then on Friday this week at 9 a.m. Pacific, as well as Gary's is at 9 a.m. Pacific on Thursday. On Friday, Warescape is going to be talking about what they're doing in data warehouse automation. And that's an interesting subject because data warehouses have at some level, you know, everybody seems to know everything about data warehouses, but this concept of automating a data warehouse is somewhat new and can have massive impacts. So if you have a data warehouse or you're looking to build a data warehouse, absolutely tune in on Friday at 9 a.m. to listen to that presentation from our sponsor, Warescape. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you again on one of these in the future.
So do I, Rich. Thank you so much.
All right, I want to thank everybody who attended today live and say hello to anybody watching in the future. This ends our call today. Thank you to Rich Giassi for hosting, and thank you to David Marco for joining us today. If you're interested in replay of this video, it'll be available very shortly on David's portal at www.bacollaborative.com. We hope to see you there soon, and thanks again for joining.